The wheelchair's custom chrome wheels caught the chandelier light as Tak Ro-woon positioned himself at the head table of Aurelia, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. His lieutenants spoke in hushed reverence around him, discussing territory disputes and profit margins, but Ro-woon barely heard them. He was scanning the room with the predatory awareness that had kept him alive in a world designed to kill men like him. Leader of the Gwangmyeong Syndicate, a name that made hardened criminals check over their shoulders, yet tonight that familiar bitterness crept in. The server's too careful politeness. The way his own men sometimes forgot to meet his eyes, as if the wheelchair had erased the dangerous man who occupied it. He reached for his wine glass, jaw tight with frustration. Then she walked in. Deep brown skin luminous under the restaurant's amber glow, natural coils framing a face that commanded attention without asking for it. The red suit she wore wasn't just clothing, it was a declaration of war. Every head in the room turned, including Ro-woon's, but unlike everyone else who quickly looked away when they noticed where she was headed, she kept her gaze locked on him. Direct. Unflinching. Absolutely fearless. His lieutenants fell silent as she approached their table, the click of her heels against marble echoing like gunshots. Security moved to intercept, but Ro-woon raised one hand, curiosity overriding caution. She stopped directly in front of him, leaned down until her face was level with his, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something expensive and dangerous like everything about her. "I've heard you're someone important," she said, her voice smooth as silk wrapped around a blade. A small smile played at her lips, equal parts seduction and challenge. "Prove it." Ro-woon's pulse quickened, though his expression remained carved from stone. No one had spoken to him like this in 3 years. No one dared. "I'll go on more dates with you," she continued, pulling a card from her clutch and placing it on the white tablecloth between them, "if you can impress me." Before he could respond, she straightened, turned on those lethal heels and walked away. The entire restaurant seemed to exhale. Min-jun, his right hand, leaned in with alarm already written across his face, but Ro-woon was staring at the card. "Coordinates. A time. Midnight 2 days from now." "Boss, this is clearly—" "Run her background," Ro-woon interrupted, his eyes still fixed on the door where she'd disappeared. "I want to know everything." But even as he gave the order, he knew he'd already made his decision. For the first time since the explosion that had stolen his legs and nearly his life, Tak Ro-woon felt something other than rage. He felt alive. In a world where every move is a gamble and every gaze is a threat, don't let this story slip through your fingers. Join the syndicate by hitting that like button and subscribing to ensure you never miss a play. This game of power is just beginning. Drop a comment below and let us know which territory you're watching from. The coordinates led to a warehouse in Brooklyn that looked abandoned from the outside, but Ro-woon could hear the roar of the crowd 3 blocks away. His men had protested bringing him here, to a place where exits were limited and enemies were plentiful, but he'd silenced them with a single look. If this was a trap, he'd spring it with his eyes wide open. Inside, the air tasted like blood and money. The underground fighting ring was packed with the city's most dangerous criminals, all gathered around a cage where 2 fighters were trying to kill each other for entertainment. Ro-woon's wheelchair cut through the crowd, his reputation clearing a path more effectively than his bodyguards ever could. She was waiting in the VIP section, bathed in crimson light that made her look like something conjured from his darkest fantasies. Demi didn't stand when he arrived, just gestured to the table where a briefcase sat between 2 glasses of whiskey. $100,000, she said, sliding the case toward him. "Turn it into $1 million by the end of the night. Use your mind, your connections, whatever you want. Just don't bore me." Ro-woon opened the case, counted the bills with practiced efficiency, then looked up at her with a smile that had made grown men confess to crimes they didn't commit. "And if I succeed? Then maybe you're worth a second date." She leaned back, crossing her legs with deliberate slowness. "Impress me, Tak Ro-woon." The next 2 hours were a masterclass in controlled chaos. Ro-woon read the fighters like open books, spotted the fixed matches, sent coded signals to his men scattered throughout the crowd. He bet heavy on underdogs he knew would win, orchestrated side bets with criminals too greedy to see they were being played. Demi watched it all with those knowing eyes, sipping her whiskey and saying nothing. Between rounds, she joined him at his table, sitting close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her skin. "Tell me about the accident," she said, her voice casual but her gaze sharp as broken glass. Why do you care? Rowoon countered, tracking another fight while hyper-aware of her presence beside him. Because everyone sees the wheelchair. I want to know if the man inside it is still dangerous or just dangerous enough. She touched his arm, just a brush of fingers, but electricity shot through him. 3 years ago. Car bomb. You survived, but 3 of your men didn't. His jaw tightened. You've done your homework. I always do my homework. Her smile was wicked. Your turn. Ask me something. Why me? The question came out rougher than he intended. You could have any man in this city. Why challenge someone in a wheelchair? Demi leaned in until her lips were inches from his ear. Because powerful men bore me. But a powerful man who's been broken and rebuilt himself into something sharper? That's interesting. The final fight was reaching its climax when everything went wrong. Rowoon spotted them first. 3 men pushing through the crowd with weapons barely concealed, their eyes locked on him with lethal intent. Rival gang, probably hired by someone stupid enough to think an underground fight was the perfect place for an assassination. His bodyguards moved instantly, but the attackers were already too close. Gunfire erupted, the crowd scattering in panic. Rowoon's hand went to his own weapon, but Demi was faster. She pulled a sleek pistol from her purse with the ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times and put a bullet in the lead attacker's shoulder before he could fire. The man went down screaming. Stay down, she commanded Rowoon, positioning herself between him and the remaining threats. But his men had already engaged, the warehouse transforming into a war zone. When the chaos settled and bodies littered the floor, Demi turned back to him. Blood spattered her red suit, but her hands were steady as she placed one palm flat against his chest, feeling his racing heartbeat through the expensive fabric of his shirt. Her touch lingered, intimate and possessive. You're still alive, she murmured, those dark eyes searching his face. I'm impressed. Barely. Rowoon grabbed her wrist, pulling her closer until she had to brace her other hand on his wheelchair to keep from falling into his lap. The world narrowed to just the 2 of them, breathing hard, adrenaline and something infinitely more dangerous crackling between them. Next time you save my life, he said, his voice low and rough with promise, I'll have to return the favor. Her smile was pure sin. I'm counting on it. As his men cleaned up the scene and disposed of evidence, Minjun approached with his phone extended, his expression grim. Boss, we need to talk. Now. Rowoon watched Demi walk away into the night, her hips swaying with lethal confidence. He didn't want to look at whatever Minjun had to show him, but the urgency in his lieutenant's voice couldn't be ignored. The attackers, Minjun said quietly, pulling up security footage. They work for Crimson Serpent. The same faction that's been moving against us for months. He swiped to another image and Rowoon's blood went cold. It showed Demi, clear as day, speaking with a known serpent lieutenant before the fights began. She set this up, Minjun continued. The whole thing was a test. The question is, what's she testing you for? Rowoon stared at the footage, then at Demi's retreating figure disappearing into the Brooklyn night. She'd saved his life and possibly orchestrated the threat in the first place. She was everything he'd ever wanted and quite possibly the weapon that would destroy him. His greatest threat or his darkest desire. Maybe both. Definitely both. Find out everything about her connection to Crimson Serpent, Rowoon ordered, his voice deadly calm. And double my security detail for the next date. Boss. I said for the next date, Minjun. Rowoon's smile was sharp enough to cut. Because I'm not done playing her game. Not even close. The gallery invitation arrived by messenger 3 days after Brooklyn, printed on heavy black cardstock with gold embossing. Beneath the legitimate details of a Chelsea art opening, Demi had written in elegant script. Second date. Acquire lot 7. Don't disappoint me. Rowoon had spent those 3 days investigating her, but every lead died in shadows. Demi Gilliam was a ghost wrapped in expensive perfume and dangerous smiles. The Crimson Serpent connection haunted him, yet here he was, rolling into the gallery like a moth drawn to flames that would surely burn him alive. She stood before an abstract painting, draped in black silk that clung to every curve, her natural coils swept up to expose the elegant line of her neck. When she turned and saw him, her smile was lethal. You came, she said as if there'd been any doubt. You knew I would. Rowoon maneuvered closer, aware of the gallery's other patrons. Too many faces he recognized from criminal enterprises, too few who were here for the art. What am I really buying tonight? Demi leaned down, her lips brushing his ear as she whispered. Lot 7 is a painting called Serpent's Garden. It contains something valuable hidden in plain sight. Win it for me and I'll tell you one truth about who I really am. The auction was brutal. Rowoon recognized weapons dealers, cartel representatives, and at least 3 men who'd tried to kill him in the past year. The painting itself was unremarkable, abstract reds and blacks. But when it came up for bidding, the energy in the room shifted. Someone else knew its real value. Rowoon played it perfectly, using intermediaries and coded phone calls to drive up the price while appearing disinterested. Demi played her role flawlessly, draping herself across his wheelchair's armrest, trailing fingers along his shoulder, whispering meaningless flirtations that made his pulse spike. To everyone watching, they were lovers indulging in expensive games. When he won the bid at $800,000, Demi's hand tightened on his shoulder. Well done, she murmured. Now let's collect your prize before someone decides to take it by force. In a private viewing room away from the crowd, Rowoon finally cornered her. Brooklyn wasn't an accident. You arranged that attack to test me. Now this, you're using me to steal intelligence from Crimson Serpent. Tell me why, Demi, before I decide you're more trouble than you're worth. Her mask slipped for just a moment, something raw and wounded flickering in her eyes. Maybe I'm stealing from them because they deserve it. Maybe I'm sick of being my father's weapon. Or maybe... The door exploded inward. A Crimson Serpent enforcer, gun already raised, murder in his eyes. Boss's orders. The Gwangmyeong bastard dies tonight. Rowoon moved with practiced precision. His wheelchair wasn't just transportation, it was a weapon. Blades deployed from the armrests as he spun, bulletproof plating deflecting the first shot. He drove one blade through the enforcer's thigh, then finished him with brutal efficiency, the man's blood pooling on pristine white floors. In the main hall, fire alarms suddenly screamed to life. Demi's work, creating chaos to cover the murder. Rowoon cleaned his blade as sprinklers activated, gallery patrons fleeing in panic. They escaped through service exits into rain-soaked alleys, both breathing hard. Demi stared at him with something between horror and fascination. I didn't think you had it in you, to be that vicious. Rowoon caught her wrist, pulling her against a brick wall, rain plastering his hair to his forehead, blood still staining his hands. You bring out the worst in me. Or maybe the best. I can't tell anymore. The space between them evaporated. Her breath mingled with his, the world reduced to this moment, this woman, this dangerous precipice. He could taste the rain on her lips, almost. Demi pulled away, chest heaving. You haven't impressed me enough yet. But her voice shook, betraying her. Back at his penthouse, Rowoon examined the painting under specialized lights. The abstract pattern concealed a map, streets, buildings, coordinates. All Crimson Serpent safe houses. Demi had led him to acquire intelligence on her own father's empire. Was she betraying Marcus Gilliam for him, or orchestrating something infinitely more complex? His phone shattered the silence, the number unknown, encrypted. Did you enjoy your date with the Serpent's daughter? The voice was distorted, mechanical, terrifying in its calm. Marcus Gilliam sends his regards. The next time you see Demi, ask her what happened to your predecessor. The line went dead. Rowoon's hands clenched on his wheelchair's armrests. His predecessor, the previous Gwangmyeong leader, had died in the same car bombing that had stolen Rowoon's ability to walk. And now he had confirmation. Demi was Marcus Gilliam's daughter. The woman who'd saved his life in Brooklyn might be the same woman who'd destroyed it 3 years ago. And he was falling for her anyway, plummeting toward destruction with his eyes wide open and his heart refusing to listen to reason. The rooftop was perfect for an execution disguised as romance. Candles flickered in glass hurricanes, casting dancing shadows across white tablecloths. Manhattan glittered below like scattered diamonds, beautiful and oblivious to the violence about to unfold. Rowoon's snipers were positioned on 3 surrounding buildings, invisible but deadly. Minjun waited in the stairwell shadows, armed and ready. When the elevator doors opened and Demi stepped out in a dress the color of midnight, she paused. Her eyes swept the rooftop with the practiced assessment of someone who knew exactly what a trap looked like. Then she smiled and walked forward anyway, heels clicking against concrete with the rhythm of a countdown. "You're planning to kill me tonight," she said, settling into the chair across from him with elegant ease. "I can see your men. 3 buildings, 7 shooters total. You've improved your security since Brooklyn." Rowoon poured wine with steady hands. "You're Marcus Gilliam's daughter. The serpent's precious heir. Tell me why I shouldn't end this before you destroy everything I've built. Because you want answers first." Demi lifted her glass, the wine catching candlelight like blood. "My brother was 15 years old. His name was Julian. 3 years ago your organization raided a Crimson Serpent warehouse in Queens. He wasn't supposed to be there, he was just a kid who followed the wrong people to the wrong place. Your men didn't check. They didn't care. The building went up in flames and Julian burned with it." Rowoon's jaw tightened. He remembered that raid. Remembered the intel that said the warehouse was empty except for product and guards. That was the same night. The same night your predecessor died in the car bombing. The same night you were paralyzed. Demi's voice cracked just slightly. "My father orchestrated that attack as revenge for Julian. And when it only crippled you instead of killing you, he groomed me to finish the job. Spent 3 years turning his daughter into a weapon aimed at your heart. And yet here you sit telling me this instead of pulling the trigger. Because I've watched you for months, Rowoon. I know every scar, every decision, every brutal choice you've made to survive. And somewhere between planning your death and actually meeting you I realized." She stopped, something vulnerable and terrified flickering across her face. "I realized I don't want to be his weapon anymore." The rooftop exploded into chaos. Assassins poured from both stairwells, too many, too fast. Not Rowoon's men. These wore Crimson Serpent colors and their weapons were trained on both of them. Marcus Gilliam had sent his own soldiers to eliminate his daughter and her target in one efficient purge. "Down!" Rowoon barked, overturning the table as gunfire erupted. His snipers returned fire from their perches while Minjun emerged from the shadows, engaging the attackers with brutal precision. But it was Demi who shocked him, pulling a knife from her thigh holster and moving with lethal grace, fighting her father's men with the viciousness of someone who had nothing left to lose. Rowoon directed the defense like conducting an orchestra of violence, his tactical mind 3 steps ahead of every move. Minjun East stairwell. Marksman 2 suppressing fire on the water tower. Then Demi threw herself between Rowoon and an assassin's bullet, the impact spinning her sideways as blood bloomed across her shoulder. She went down hard but still managed to drive her knife into the shooter's throat before collapsing. When the rooftop finally fell silent except for the groans of the dying, Rowoon reached her. Blood soaked through his fingers as he pressed against her wound, her face pale in the candlelight that somehow still flickered despite the carnage. "I was supposed to kill you tonight," she whispered, each word dragging through pain. "That was my mission. But I couldn't. I came here knowing you'd probably kill me and I still couldn't hurt you." Rowoon's throat tightened. "I knew. I've known since the gallery. And I was supposed to kill you too." They laughed, dark and broken, 2 would-be assassins falling for their targets with the kind of inevitability that only ended in blood and ashes. Minjun approached, his expression grim. "Boss, there's something you need to know. I've been feeding information to Marcus Gilliam. I thought she was manipulating you, thought I was protecting you by forcing this confrontation. But now," he looked at Demi bleeding in Rowoon's arms. "I don't know whose side anyone is on anymore." Demi's phone rang, shrill in the aftermath. Rowoon answered it, his voice deadly calm. 72 hours. Marcus Gilliam's cold voice cut through the line. "Kill Tak Rowoon and bring me proof or I release everything. Financial records, witness testimonies, FBI-ready evidence that will destroy Gwangmyeong. Your empire falls and my daughter dies with it. The clock starts now." The line went dead. Demi's fingers gripped Rowoon's hand with desperate strength. "He has files," she managed through the pain. "Everything your organization's crimes, betrayals. He'll send them to the FBI. We're both dead either way." Rowoon looked at the woman bleeding in his arms, at Minjun whose betrayal was meant as protection, at the bodies littering his rooftop. 2 empires on a collision course, and somehow this dangerous, impossible woman had become the only thing that mattered. "Then we don't play his game," Rowoon said quietly, his decision made. "We burn both empires to the ground and build something new from the ashes. Together." Demi's smile was blood-stained and beautiful. I was hoping you'd say that. Demi recovered in Rowoon's penthouse like a caged panther, pacing despite her bandaged shoulder, studying blueprints spread across his marble dining table. 48 hours until Marcus Gilliam's deadline, and they'd chosen the most dangerous option: total war. The vault is here, she said, tapping a finger on the Crimson Serpent headquarters schematic. Third sublevel biometric locks, armed guards rotating every 2 hours. My access codes will get us past the first 2 checkpoints, but after that we fight. Rowoon rolled closer, studying her work with the tactical precision that had kept him alive in a world designed to kill him. My team can neutralize the guards floor by floor. Silent entry, systematic clearing, no witnesses. Their eyes met across the blueprints, and the air between them crackled with something more dangerous than the violence they were planning. 2 days in close quarters had stripped away pretense. She taught him Serpent security protocols while he shared Gwangmyeong's hidden arsenal. They were no longer enemies playing a deadly game. They were conspirators forging something darker than either empire had ever been. This is insane, Demi whispered, but her hand found his across the table. Then we'll be insane together. The infiltration began at 2 a.m., when Manhattan's underworld was deepest asleep. Demi's codes opened the first doors like magic, her voice steady as she guided them past security checkpoints that should have been impenetrable. Rowoon's elite team moved like shadows behind them, silenced weapons dropping guards before they could trigger alarms. The violence escalated with each floor. By the second level, stealth gave way to controlled chaos. Demi moved like a dancer in combat, her knife finding throats and arteries with surgical precision while Rowoon directed the assault through comms, his wheelchair modified with armor plating and concealed weapons that transformed him into something far more dangerous than anyone expected. East Corridor, 3 hostiles, he murmured into his mic, and his men responded with lethal efficiency. Demi, stairwell on your 6. She spun, blade already extending, and the attacker crumpled. They operated as one seamless unit, her instinct and his strategy creating a symphony of controlled destruction that left bodies in their wake. The vault room was an anticlimax of silence after the battle above. Demi's trembling fingers worked the biometric scanner while Rowoon's men secured the perimeter. The massive door swung open to reveal filing cabinets, hard drives, evidence of decades of criminal enterprise. But as they searched for the Gwangmyeong files, Demi found something worse. Her hands stilled on a folder marked with both organizations' seals. Rowoon. You need to see this. Human trafficking routes. Joint operations. Financial records showing Marcus Gilliam and the former Gwangmyeong leadership had been partners in the most depraved crimes imaginable. Both their fathers had built empires on suffering far beyond gang warfare and territory disputes. Demi sank to the floor beside his wheelchair, exhausted and shaking. Blood spattered her face, whose she couldn't remember. I hated you before I knew you, she confessed, her voice breaking. I spent 3 years hating you for my brother's death. Now I hate that I can't hate you anymore. Rowoon reached out, his fingers gentle as they wiped blood and tears from her cheek. We're the same, you and I. Weapons our fathers forged from grief and rage. But we don't have to be their weapons anymore. The kiss was inevitable. Violent and desperate, tasting of blood and gunpowder and something terrifyingly real. Her hands tangled in his hair as he pulled her closer. 3 years of hatred and attraction colliding into something that felt like salvation and damnation wrapped into one. Then Demi saw it, another file partially hidden. Her hands shook as she opened it and her blood turned to ice. The car bombing. 3 years ago. It wasn't my father. Rowoon went still. What? It was an inside job. Your second-in-command orchestrated it to take over Gwangmyeong. The evidence is all here. Payments, communications, everything. She looked up at him, horror dawning. Minjun. It was Minjun all along. They burned the files as police sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had tipped off the authorities. Racing back through streets slick with rain, Rowoon's phone illuminated with an incoming video call. Minjun's face filled the screen, and behind him Rowoon's elderly mother sat bound to a chair in her own living room. You destroyed everything, Minjun snarled, his mask of loyalty finally shattered. Betrayed your own organization for this woman. Now you'll watch everyone you love die before I take what should have been mine from the beginning. The call ended with gunfire and his mother's scream. Rowoon's face drained of color, his hands clenched white-knuckled on his wheelchair. Demi grabbed his hand, her grip fierce and unwavering. "We go to war," she said, her voice cold as death. "Right now. All of it ends tonight." Manhattan became a war zone as the sun set on their final night. Rowoon and Demi stood in his penthouse war room, weapons being distributed, forces being divided, both knowing that in 24 hours they'd either rule this city or be buried beneath it. "I'll get your mother," Demi said, checking the magazine on her pistol with practiced efficiency. Her shoulder was barely healed, but her eyes burned with purpose. "Minjun won't see me coming." Rowoon caught her wrist, pulling her close enough to memorize every detail of her face. "Come back to me. Always." She kissed him hard, tasting like violence and promises neither of them was sure they could keep. They split their forces at midnight. Demi led the assault on Minjun's stronghold in Brooklyn, a fortified warehouse where he'd been consolidating power. The attack was brutal from the first breach. Minjun's men fought with the desperation of traitors who knew mercy wasn't coming. Demi moved through corridors slick with blood, taking a knife wound to her ribs, a bullet grazing her thigh, but nothing stopped her forward momentum. She was vengeance in human form, every kill bringing her closer to the man who'd orchestrated 3 years of suffering. When she finally kicked open the door to where Rowoon's mother was held, she found the elderly woman standing over 2 dead guards, a kitchen knife clutched in her weathered hands. Blood spattered her clothes, but her eyes were calm, almost amused. "My son chose well," Mrs. Tack said simply, setting down the knife. "Now let's go find that bastard Minjun." Across the city, Rowoon rolled into the Crimson Serpent compound with his elite guard flanking him. Marcus Gilliam waited in his office, surrounded by the last of his loyal soldiers. The firefight was intense but brief. Rowoon's tactical brilliance had always exceeded Marcus's brute force approach. When the smoke cleared, only Marcus remained, sitting behind his desk like a king on a crumbling throne. "I respected you," Marcus said, his voice weary. "Saw what you'd overcome, how you'd rebuilt yourself stronger. But my daughter went soft. Fell for the enemy. I couldn't allow it. She didn't go soft." Rowoon's gun never wavered. "She became human again. Something you forgot how to be." The execution was clean, efficient, devoid of pleasure. Just grim necessity. As Marcus slumped forward, Rowoon felt nothing but the weight of what the city had cost them both. Dawn broke over Manhattan, painted in violence. Rowoon and Demi reunited on the penthouse rooftop where they'd first shared truth, both bleeding, exhausted, carrying the physical evidence of the war they'd waged. His mother was safe below, being treated by their medical team. Minjun was dead. Demi had put 3 bullets in him herself. No words were necessary. Demi collapsed into Rowoon's arms, and he held her like she was the only real thing in a world built on lies. Her blood mixed with his, their hearts beating the same exhausted rhythm. "We can't go back," she whispered against his chest. "Then we go forward," he replied, his hand tangling in her hair. "Together." In the aftermath, as they sorted through Minjun's files, they discovered the truth behind his betrayal. Communications with an international crime syndicate, promises of power and territory if he eliminated both the Gwangmyeong and Crimson Serpent leadership. Minjun hadn't been a mastermind, he'd been a pawn in a much larger game. 1 week later they stood on that same rooftop at sunset, overlooking an empire they'd built from ashes. 2 organizations merged into something new, something they controlled together. Demi leaned against Rowoon's wheelchair, his hand resting possessively on her hip. His phone chimed with an encrypted message. "Congratulations on your hostile takeover. We'll be seeing you soon." Attached was a photo, them on this rooftop, taken from impossible distance, crystal clear despite the miles. Someone with extraordinary resources had been watching everything, orchestrating everything. Demi stiffened, her hand instinctively moving to the weapon at her hip. "We're not done." Rowoon pulled her closer, his smile sharp as broken glass. "No. But this time we see them coming. And this time we're not fighting alone." The city glittered below them, beautiful and brutal, waiting for the next war. But for the first time in 3 years, Rowoon felt something other than rage burning in his chest. He felt hope. Dangerous, desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, they could survive what was coming. Together. 6 months transformed New York's underworld. The merged empire of Gwangmyeong and Crimson Serpent became something unprecedented. Efficient, brutal, and ruled by two people who'd burned down their father's legacies to forge something darker. Rowoon and Demi were no longer pretending. In the boardroom they commanded with synchronized precision. In their penthouse bedroom they claimed each other with the same intensity they brought to warfare. But the international syndicate's shadow never left them. The invitation arrived on heavy cardstock, embossed with gold. A meeting in Dubai to negotiate territorial boundaries. Both knew it was an execution dressed in diplomatic language. "They'll try to kill us the moment we arrive," Demi said, studying the invitation in their war room. 3 months pregnant, though barely showing, her hand unconsciously drifted to her stomach. Rowoon caught the gesture, his expression softening in a way only she ever saw. "Then we make sure we kill them first. I've had our people embedded in their organization since that rooftop message. They think they're hunting us. They have no idea we've been inside their operation for months." The night before Dubai, in their hotel room overlooking the Persian Gulf, Demi stood at the window with uncharacteristic vulnerability in her posture. Rowoon approached, his wheelchair silent on plush carpet. "I'm pregnant," she said quietly, though he already knew. "Early stages. Unexpected. Terrifying." He pulled her down to him, his hands framing her face with a gentleness that belied the monster the world believed him to be. "We're not just fighting for ourselves anymore. No." Her voice broke slightly. "We're fighting for something that doesn't deserve our world. Something pure that we might destroy just by existing." Rowoon reached into his jacket, but instead of a ring he pulled out a folded document. Legal papers transferring half his empire into trust for their unborn child, protected from their criminal enterprises. "We end this tonight. Then we decide who we want to be. Not what our fathers made us. Not what this city expects. Who we choose to be." Demi kissed him with tears streaming down her face, tasting salt and promise and the terrifying possibility of hope. The meeting was held in the presidential suite of the Burj Al Arab, all gold fixtures and Arabian luxury. The syndicate's leadership sat arranged like judges at an execution. Their smiles were poisonous. "Welcome," the syndicate head said, gesturing to empty chairs. "Shall we discuss your surrender?" The trap sprung with brutal efficiency, doors slamming shut, assassins emerging from hidden positions, weapons trained on them from every angle. But Rowoon and Demi had planned for this. His embedded agents had compromised the syndicate's security, and at his signal the room exploded into chaos. Demi moved like death incarnate, protecting her unborn child with lethal precision. Rowoon's wheelchair became a weapon platform, concealed firearms eliminating threats while he directed their counter-ambush through encrypted comms. They fought back-to-back through a luxury suite transformed into a slaughterhouse, leaving bodies in their wake until only the syndicate leader remained, cornered and terrified. "You were supposed to die," he gasped. "Everyone thinks that," Demi replied and pulled the trigger. Victory should have tasted sweet. Instead they found evidence on the syndicate leader's phone that made Rowoon's blood run cold: communications with his mother. Mrs. Tak had been secretly negotiating with the syndicate, believing her son had become the monster she'd always feared, trying to save him by destroying everything he'd built. Her betrayal came from love, but love could kill just as surely as hate. They returned to New York in tense silence. The pregnancy news somehow leaked during their absence. A bounty had been placed, $50 million for Demi Gilliam alive. Every criminal organization saw her as Rowoon's ultimate vulnerability, the key to destroying his empire. The penthouse felt wrong the moment the elevator doors opened. Too quiet. Too dark. "Stay behind me," Rowoon commanded, but Demi was already drawing her weapon, her other hand instinctively protecting her stomach. The lights died completely. Emergency systems disabled. And in the darkness red laser sights appeared like demon eyes. 1, 2, 5, 10, a dozen targeting points painting the walls, their bodies, the space where their child grew. Demi's whisper cut through the silence like a knife. "We're not alone." A voice emerged from the shadows, chillingly familiar. "No, you're not. Ho-san. Did you really think I'd let you become everything I tried to prevent?" Mrs. Tak stepped into the dim emergency lighting, surrounded by armed mercenaries, her face carved from grief and terrible determination. "I'm sorry, but I have to save you from yourself. even if it means destroying everything you love. The penthouse firefight lasted 17 minutes and cost them everything. Rowoon's mother led the assault with the cold efficiency of someone who'd once been married to a crime lord, her mercenaries trained and merciless. Only the emergency exit his paranoia had installed saved them, Demi firing cover while Rowoon's wheelchair navigated the chaos, both barely escaping with their lives. The safe house in upstate New York was a fortress disguised as a farmhouse, surrounded by woods and isolation. But isolation felt like a cage to Demi, who paced like a wounded animal, one hand always on her stomach protecting what grew there. "We can't hide forever," she said, staring out at snow-covered trees. "They'll find us. They always do. Then we run. We disappear. New identities, new country, new life." Rowoon's voice was steel wrapped in desperation. "You're carrying our child, Demi. That matters more than any empire." She turned on him, eyes blazing. "And what kind of life is that? Running? Hiding? Teaching our child that power means nothing if you're too afraid to keep it. Teaching our child that they're worth more than our pride." His control cracked, voice rising. "I've lost everything before. My legs, my organization, people I trusted. I won't lose you. I won't lose this." The argument shattered against the sound of breaking glass downstairs. They'd been found. The assault was surgical. Professional. These weren't Mrs. Tack's mercenaries. These were syndicate specialists sent to capture, not kill. Demi realized it first, saw how they targeted her specifically, how they created corridors to herd her away from Rowoon. She made her choice in the space between heartbeats. "I surrender," she called out, stepping into view with her hands raised, her weapon clattering to the floor. "I'll go willingly. Just leave him alive." "No." Rowoon's roar was animalistic, but she was already moving toward the assassins, already making the trade that would save him and destroy her. Her last look back was meant to memorize his face. "I love you," she mouthed, and then they had her, dragging her into darkness while Rowoon's screams echoed through empty rooms. The next 48 hours transformed Rowoon into the monster legends warned about. He mobilized every asset, called in every favor, burned every bridge in a 3-state rampage that left the syndicate's network in smoking ruins. He didn't sleep, didn't eat, just carved through enemies with methodical brutality, following the trail of breadcrumbs they'd stupidly left behind. The warehouse in Jersey was their mistake. Too obvious, too sloppy, the arrogance of people who thought they'd already won. Rowoon came through the door like death incarnate, his modified wheelchair equipped with enough firepower to level a building. The syndicate guards never stood a chance. He painted the warehouse red with their blood, moving through corridors with single-minded purpose until he found her. Demi hung from chains in a basement room, her body bearing the evidence of torture, her face swollen and bruised. But her eyes still burned with defiance. "I knew you'd come," she gasped through broken lips. "Never doubted." Rowoon's hands shook as he freed her, catching her when she collapsed. Blood, his, hers, the people he'd killed to reach her, covered them both. And for the first time since the car bombing 3 years ago, he broke completely. "I can't do this without you," he whispered against her hair, his voice destroyed. "I won't. You're everything. The Empire means nothing if you're not in it." Demi clung to him with what strength remained, and in that moment she saw past the Mafia boss, past the strategist, past the wheelchair and the reputation. She saw the man, vulnerable, terrified, wholly hers. The hospital in Manhattan took her immediately. Internal bleeding. Trauma. Complications with the pregnancy. Rowoon sat beside her bed, holding her hand like a lifeline, while doctors delivered devastating news in clinical terms that didn't match the magnitude of what they'd lost. Miscarriage. The baby was gone. Demi stared at the ceiling with eyes that had died somewhere in that warehouse. "We're poison," she whispered. "Everything we touch dies. Our father's empires. Our enemies. Our child." She turned to look at Rowoon, and her emptiness terrified him more than any gun ever had. "Maybe we shouldn't be together. Maybe that's the only way to stop destroying everything." "Demi, no." The door burst open. Federal agents flooded in, weapons drawn, arrest warrants already prepared. Rowoon recognized his lawyer's signature on the bottom of the documents. The man they'd trusted with their legitimate holdings had been feeding information to the FBI for months. Tack Rowoon, Demi Gilliam, You're both under arrest for racketeering, murder, human trafficking, and approximately 47 other charges. The lead agent's smile was satisfied. The syndicate might have lost, but they made sure you lost too. All the evidence Marcus Gilliam collected? It's been delivered to us. Gift wrapped. As handcuffs closed around their wrists, Rowoon reached for Demi's hand across the hospital bed, their fingers barely touching. She didn't pull away, but she didn't grip back either. Just let their hands lie together, connected but already drifting apart. Their empire was crumbling. Their child was gone. And now even their freedom was forfeit. In the back of separate police cars, both stared out at the city they'd bled for, wondering if love could survive when everything else had already died. The prison transport separated them at the federal courthouse steps. Rowoon watched Demi disappear into one van while guards loaded him into another, both bound for different facilities, different hells. Her eyes had been empty since losing the baby, but in that final moment before the doors closed, he saw something flicker, survival instinct kicking back to life. Maximum security meant Rowoon was surrounded by men who'd heard his reputation, seen his wheelchair, and decided he was an easy target. The first attempt came on his third night, a shiv aimed at his throat during dinner. He caught the attacker's wrist, broke it with clinical precision, and sent a message that echoed through every cell block. The wheelchair hadn't made him weak. It had made him efficient. From behind bars he orchestrated what remained of his empire. Coded messages in legal documents. Bribes disguised as legitimate payments. Witness intimidation conducted through intermediaries. The federal case was strong, but Rowoon had spent a lifetime learning that every system had cracks. Demi's women's facility held different dangers. A rival gang leader with Crimson Serpent family ties ran the cell block, and she'd promised her cousins that Demi would pay for Marcus Gilliam's death. The assassination attempt came during yard time. 3 women with improvised weapons coordinated like soldiers. Demi moved like the weapon her father had forged, disarming 2 before they could strike, breaking the third woman's jaw with an elbow that echoed across concrete. She stood over them breathing hard and for the first time since the miscarriage felt something other than emptiness. She felt alive. Their communication was monitored, limited to brief video calls and letters that guards read before delivery. But in those stolen moments, the truth of what they meant to each other became undeniable. Do you regret it? Demi asked during a call 6 months into their incarceration, her face gaunt on the pixelated screen. Meeting me that night at Aurelia? Rowoon leaned closer to the camera, needing her to see the absolute certainty in his eyes. You're the only thing I've never regretted. If I die in here, I die knowing I lived more in our time together than in my entire life before you. You gave me something worth more than empire or power. You gave me purpose. Tears streaked down Demi's face, the first since she'd lost their child in that warehouse basement. Then let's not die here. Let's remind them why they should fear us. Their legal team worked miracles born of desperation. Investigations revealed that the federal prosecutor had been taking bribes from a new criminal organization, a Chinese triad moving into New York during the power vacuum. Evidence of prosecutorial misconduct piled up until the entire case became contaminated. 8 months after their arrest, a mistrial was declared. The prosecutor was led away in handcuffs while Rowoon and Demi were released on technicalities, the system's corruption becoming their salvation. They walked out of their respective prisons on the same gray morning, coordinated by lawyers who'd orchestrated releases within minutes of each other. No celebration waited. No cheering crowds or loyal soldiers ready to rebuild. Just a message delivered to both their phones simultaneously. Your territory belongs to the Dragon Head Triad now. Your assets are frozen. Your empire is ashes. Welcome back to nothing. Rowoon stood outside the prison gates in clothes that hung loose from months of incarceration, his wheelchair somehow making him look more dangerous rather than diminished. Across the city, Demi emerged from her facility looking carved from stone, beautiful and deadly despite everything prison had tried to take from her. They met at the courthouse steps an hour later, drawn together like gravity, like inevitability. No words were necessary as they stood together, 2 people who'd lost everything except each other. Finally, Demi took his hand, her grip fierce and certain. Ready to build it all again? Rowoon's smile was dark as midnight, sharp as broken glass, and absolutely feral. We took down 2 empires before. What's one more? Behind them, the city sprawled vast and brutal, waiting to see if the legends who'd burned it down once could rise from ashes to do it again. But this time they weren't their father's weapons. This time they were fighting for themselves, for each other, for the future they'd almost had. The Dragon Head Triad thought they'd won by taking territory while their enemies were caged. They didn't understand what they'd really done. They'd given Rowoon and Demi something far more dangerous than empire. They'd given them nothing left to lose. 1 year carved their names into New York's underworld with blood and strategy. The Dragon Head Triad fell piece by piece to their coordinated assault, Rowoon's tactical brilliance and Demi's ruthless execution creating a partnership that enemies called inevitable and allies called unstoppable. They rebuilt their empire from nothing, but this time it was truly theirs, shaped by their choices rather than their father's legacies. The changes were subtle but profound. Less violence, more precision. Strategic moves over brute force. They still ruled the shadows, but with the calculated efficiency of chess masters rather than warlords. Their empire grew not through fear alone but through respect earned in blood and kept through intelligence. The anniversary of their first meeting brought them back to Aurelia, the restaurant where a woman in red had challenged a mafia boss with a dare that changed 2 lives forever. Different ownership, same exclusivity, same table where it all began. Rowoon sat at the head table surrounded by his lieutenants, but his eyes tracked only one person. Demi, moving through the restaurant in black silk that turned every head, her confidence no longer armor but identity. When she sat beside him, her hand found his beneath the table, fingers interlacing with the ease of people who'd survived hell together. 1 year, she murmured. Feels like a lifetime. Feels like yesterday. The young criminal appeared with the same swagger Demi had once possessed, approaching their table with a cocky smile and foolish bravery. I heard stories about you too. Thought I'd see if the legends were real. Maybe I could. Demi moved before he finished speaking. Her hand shot out, gripping his wrist with crushing force, her other hand producing a blade that appeared against his throat so quickly he never saw it coming. The restaurant fell silent. The legends are real, she said, her voice deadly calm. And the lesson is free. Walk away now or I'll show you exactly what happens to people who mistake our mercy for weakness. He stumbled back when she released him, fear finally replacing arrogance. Smart enough to run, stupid enough to have tried. Demi returned to her seat without a word, and normal conversation resumed as if nothing had happened. The message was delivered. Their empire wasn't up for grabs. Later, on the rooftop where they'd once fought through assassins, Rowoon and Demi stood alone under stars that watched over a city they'd conquered twice. He pulled a velvet box from his jacket and Demi's breath caught, but when she opened it she found not a ring but a key, ornate and old-fashioned. To our new headquarters, Rowoon explained. Both our names on the deed. Equal partners, equal power. We built this together, Demi. Not my empire or your revenge. Ours. Tears glittered in her eyes as she closed her fingers around the key. Then she took his hand and placed it against her stomach, still flat but carrying the promise of futures they'd fought for. I'm pregnant, she whispered. Early stages. I found out this morning. Rowoon's expression transformed, fear and joy and desperate hope warring across his face. After everything we get to try again. Her voice strengthened. But this time we do it right. We raise our child outside the violence. We break the cycle our fathers started. We become better than what made us. He pulled her close, breathing her in, making promises against her hair that only she could hear. Vows of protection, of change, of choosing love over empire if it ever came to that choice again. There's something else, Demi said, pulling back slightly. Minjun is alive. I had your men fake his execution, kept him in a secure location. I knew someday his intel might be valuable, his knowledge of our enemies useful. I'm sorry I didn't tell you, but you were thinking 3 moves ahead as always. Rowoon's smile was genuine. What did you offer him? A choice. Work for us in our new empire or actually die this time. He chose loyalty. Apparently, nearly dying has a way of clarifying priorities. They stood together as the city sprawled below them, 2 people who'd been forged in violence but refused to be defined by it. The underworld would remember them not just for the empires they'd destroyed but for the one they'd built. Together as equals, as partners who'd proven love could be as powerful as fear. Did I ever impress you? Rowoon asked, his tone lighter than she'd heard in months, almost playful. That first night, you said you'd go on more dates if I could impress you. Did I? Demi's laugh was rich and real, the sound of someone who'd found home in the most unexpected place. Every single day. And I'm not bored yet. She leaned down, kissing him with the kind of tenderness that only came after surviving the worst the world could throw at you. Below them, New York glittered with possibility and danger, the city that had tried to break them and failed. Their story would be whispered in the underworld for generations. The Korean Mafia boss in a wheelchair who refused to be underestimated, and the woman in red who'd challenged him to prove his worth. Together they'd conquered enemies, empires, and their own demons. They'd become legends not because they were unbreakable, but because every time they broke, they rebuilt themselves stronger. The empire they ruled wasn't just built on crime and power. It was built on two souls who'd been weapons their fathers forged, who'd found each other in the darkness and chosen to become each other's salvation instead of destruction. In the end, they'd won not by destroying each other, but by refusing to let the world destroy them. And they were just getting started. The empire has been rebuilt and the cycle is finally broken. But in the underworld, peace never lasts for long. The shadows are already shifting and a new story is waiting to be told. Don't stop now. The next chapter of power and betrayal is already waiting for you. Click the next video to see what happens when the next empire falls.